Hello scholars, Miss Soto here. Today is Thursday, April 9th, 2020. Make sure you're watching on Thursday and no other day. Make sure that you are looking at one lesson at a time. I know you can get a little bit excited, but let's try to keep just one lesson a day. Scholars, today we are going to keep working on character traits and providing evidence, but I want to know, what is character motivation? Character motivation, get ready, go. Character motivation is what a character wants or needs. Your turn, get ready, go. Character motivation is what a character... Yes, character motivation. I know that conflict is a problem. Conflict is a... Yes, conflict is a problem. Today, scholars, we are going to learn a new chant. Silent excitement! Yes! Today, we are going to learn what external conflict is. Ooh, some of you already know, and I know, and that is okay. If you know it, do it with me. External conflict is when two characters want opposite things, but they both can't get what they want. External conflict is when two characters want opposite things, but they both can't get what they want. Your turn, get ready, go. External conflict is when... Your turn, one more time, get ready, go. External conflict is when two characters want... Yes, I hope that you're learning that at home. Scholars, if you need to go back to the video, go ahead and pause this video and go back, rewind it a little bit and go back and see if you can learn it one more time. Yes, scholars, today we are going to keep learning about characters, or who our characters are, but we also want to keep in mind the secondary characters. Even though we are writing the main characters here, I still want to keep secondary characters in mind. We are also going to come up with new character traits, super exciting, and we have to support it with evidence. Today, scholars, drum roll please! Today, we are going to read a new book called Mr. Popper's Penguins. Let's make a quick prediction. What do you think is going to happen in this book? There is this in the front cover. Ooh, maybe that is Mr. Popper, I don't know. And the back cover. Whoa, so let's keep reading. Let's start reading and see what this is all about. Mr. Popper's Penguins. Chapter 1, Stillwater. It was an afternoon, late September, in the pleasant little city of Stillwater. Mr. Popper, the house painter, was going back home from work. He was carrying his buckets, his ladders, and his boards, so that he had a rather hard time moving along. He was spattered here and there with paint and calcimine, and there was bits of wallpaper clinging to his hair and whiskers, for he was rather an untidy man. The children looked up from their plate to smile at him. Scholars, what have we learned about Mr. Popper so far? What have we learned about Mr. Popper so far? Let's go ahead and think about it in our brains. Maybe we can add it in our chart. I don't know. Scholars, I know that Mr. Popper was a little bit messy because he had paint on his clothes and wallpaper in his hair. I want to go ahead and add that to my chart. Where would I add messy? Where would I add the word messy? Oh yes, you're right. Yes, I haven't even written who I am describing. So we are going to be describing Mr. Popper. And you were right. Yes, we will write it in under personality. So I'm going to write messy. And I know that he's messy because he had paint everywhere and in his clothes. So I'm going to sum it up. I'm going to make this very short. I'm going to write this down right here. So had paint on clothes. He had paint on his clothes, and he had wallpapers in his hair, and then everything was everywhere. So I don't want to write all that because it might take the whole space. So I want to say he had paint on his clothes. He had wallpaper. Okay, yes, I got it. Had wallpaper on here. Okay, I'm gonna pause right there. I'm gonna keep reading. I wonder if we're going to have another character. Let's keep that in mind. I don't want to write down who my characters are right now because we haven't talked about them. So let's go ahead and keep going. The children looked up from their play to smile at him as he passed, and the housewife, seeing him, said, "Oh dear, there goes Mr. Popper. I must remember to ask John to have the house painted over in the spring." Oh, Mr. Popper, look at him, carrying all of those things. Let's keep going. No one knew what went on inside of Mr. Popper's head, and no one guessed that he would one day be the most famous person in Stillwater. He was a dreamer. Even when he was busiest smoothing down the paste on the wallpaper or painting outside of the other people's houses, he would forget what he was doing. Once he painted 3 sides of a kitchen green and the other side yellow. The housewife, instead of being angry and making him do it over, had liked it so well that she had made him leave it that way. And all the housewives, when they saw it, admired it too. So that pretty soon everybody in Stillwater had 2 colored kitchens. The reason Mr. Popper was so absent-minded was that he was always dreaming about far countries. He had never been out of Stillwater. Not that he was unhappy. He had a nice little house of his own, a wife whom he loved dearly, and 2 children named Janny and Bill. Still, it would have been nice, he often thought, if he could have seen something of the world before he met Mrs. Popper and settled down. Scholars, what is Mr. Popper like? What is Mr. Popper like? I'm a little bit confused because I can't think of any words for Mr. Popper. But I do know some evidence for him. I do know that he painted a kitchen 2 different colors while thinking about something else. So I'm gonna write that down for my evidence. And I am going to say, Mr. Popper, evidence, perfect. I'm going to say painted kitchen, 2 colors, while thinking something else. And I know that maybe if you are thinking about something else, I don't see anything in my character trait wall that I could use. So I'm gonna dig it into my brain. And I know, because this has happened in the classroom before, if you are thinking about something else and you are daydreaming, you're not paying attention, you must be a little bit distracted. So I think this describes Mr. Popper. Distracted. And I also want to add in a little bit more, and I want to say he is absent-minded. That also means distracted, absent-minded. Can you think of another character trait that is a college-ready word that also describes Mr. Popper? Go. Yes. Awesome. Great word, scholars. Let's keep reading and see if we can maybe introduce the other character and write it down. I think I might have an idea, but let's keep reading to double check. If he could have seen something of the world before he had met Mrs. Popper and settled down, he had never hunted tigers in India or climbed the peaks of the Himalayas or dived for pearls in the South Seas. Above all, he had never seen the poles. That was what he regretted most of all. He had never seen those great shining white expanses of ice and snow. How he wished that he had been a scientist instead of a house painter in Stillwater, so that he might have joined some of the great polar expeditions. Since he could not go, he was always thinking about them. Whenever he heard that a polar movie was in town, he was the first person at the ticket window, and often he sat through 3 shows. Whenever the town library had a new book about the Arctic or the Antarctic, the North Pole or the South Pole, Mr. Popper was the first to borrow it. Indeed, he had read so much about polar explorers that he could name all of them and tell you what each had done. He was quite an authority on the subject. His evenings were the best time of all. Then he could sit down in his little house and read about those cold regions at the top and bottom of the earth. As he read, he could take the little globe that Janny and Bill had given him the Christmas before and search out of the exact spot he was reading about. So now, as he made his way through the streets, he was happy because the day was over and because it was the end of September. When he came to the gate of the neat little bungalow at 432 Proudfoot Avenue, he turned in. "Well, my love," he said, setting down his buckets and ladders and boards and kissing Mrs. Popper, "the decorating season is over. I have painted all the kitchens in Stillwater. I have papered all the rooms in the new apartment building on Elm Street. There is no more working until spring, when people will want their houses painted." Mrs. Popper sighed. "I sometimes wish you had the kind of work that lasted all year instead of just from spring until fall," she said. "It will be very nice to have you at home for a vacation, of course. But it is a little hard to sweep with a man sitting around reading all day. I could decorate the house for you." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Popper firmly. "Last year, you painted the bathroom 4 different times because you had nothing else to do. And I think that is enough of that. But what worries me is the money. I have saved a little and dare say we can get along as we have other winters. No more roast beef, no more ice cream, not even on Sundays." "Shall we have beans every day?" asked Jenny and Bill, coming in from play. "I'm afraid so," said Mrs. Popper. "Anyway, go wash your hands for supper, and Papa, put away his litter of paints because you won't be needing them for quite a while." Scholars, after the first sentence, what is Mrs. Popper like? What is Mrs. Popper like? Let me go ahead and go back to the beginning of this page to read and have you remember and have you remind yourself what the first sentence was. Okay, it will be very nice to have you at home for vacation, of course, but it is a little hard to sweep with a man sitting around reading all day. I could decorate the house for you. No, indeed, said Mrs. Popper firmly. So scholars, I already know that Mrs. Popper is my next main character to write down. So I'm going to write this down under character, Mrs. Popper. Perfect. Now, I asked you, what is Mrs. Popper like? I know when I ask that question, what is like, I want a character trait. So, I know after reading the first sentence, I know that she was worrying about how hard it would be to keep her house clean when Mr. Popper is home thinking about not having enough money while Mrs. Popper is not working and she doesn't want nothing else. So I don't know. Let's keep thinking. So she was worrying about Mr. Popper. and how hard it is to keep the house clean. So if she wants to keep the house clean, how is she like? I'm going to write that down for my evidence. Wants to keep house clean. And guys, I already know too, by looking at this, at character motivation, I know that if a sentence has a character wants or needs, this is her motivation at the moment. So she wants to keep the house clean. She is, yes, she is clean. Yes, I'm going to write that down on my chart. And I know another word for clean. I know another word for clean could be tidy. So she is a tidy person. She is a clean person. I know that character traits do not change. Like, for example, feelings change. So you can be sad a day, and that is not a character trait. But if a feeling could be a character trait, if it's for a while, like for example, a month, you're sad for a month, that could be a character trait because it is not changing. So let's keep reading. Let's see if we can find more evidence, see if we can come up with more character traits and maybe find more motivations. Chapter 2, The Voice in the Air. That evening, when the little Poppers had been put to bed, Mr. and Mrs. Popper settled down for a long, quiet evening. The neat living room at 432 Proudfoot Avenue was much like all the other living rooms in Stillwater, except that the walls were hung with pictures from the National Geographic magazine. Mrs. Popper picked up her mending while Mr. Popper collected his pipe, his book, and his globe. From time to time, Mrs. Popper sighed a little as she thought about the long winter ahead. Would there really be enough beans to last? She wondered. Mr. Popper was not worried, however, as he put on his spectacles. He was quite pleased at the prospect of a whole winter of reading travel books with no work to interrupt him. He set his little globe beside him and began to read. "What are you reading?" asked Mrs. Popper. "I am reading a book called Antarctic Adventures. It is very interesting. It tells all about the different people who had gone to the South Pole and what they have found there. Don't you ever get tired of reading about the South Pole?" "No, I don't. Of course, I would much rather go there than read about it, but reading is the next best thing. I think it must be very boring there," said Mrs. Popper. "It sounds very dull and cold with all that ice and snow." Scholars, what else have we learned about Mrs. Popper's personality? Let's go ahead and think about it a few seconds. Point to your brain. What have we learned about her personality? Scholars, I think that Mrs. Popper must be a little bit anxious and maybe a little bit worried or concerned because she keeps thinking and worrying about money and not having enough while Mr. Popper is not working. She wished that she had a job where she got paid all year, not just during spring and summer. So I'm going to write that down and I'm going to chunk it down. I know that was a lot of evidence. So I'm going to make sure that I'm writing this in the correct spot. Mrs. Popper, I know that she could be anxious. Okay, she might be anxious and maybe a little bit worried. Maybe she was a little bit concerned too. Yes. So she is anxious, worried, and concerned because she is worrying. I'm going to say worrying about money because Mr. Popper did not have a full-time job. Oh, I know that when I turn around, I'm going to see those tracking eyes and those stars. Get ready. Nice start, scholars. Great tracking. Let's keep reading. Wait, one before I keep reading. Does Mr. Popper feel the same way as Mrs. Popper about the winter? Does he feel the same way? Maybe that could be a conflict. If they don't, I'm not sure. What does this tell you about his personality? Let's go ahead and take some thinking moments. Point to your brain. When I say go, I want you to share this answer with somebody besides you. Get ready. And if you don't have anybody besides you, you can just say it out loud. Go. Well, that is a great answer, scholars. Yes, no, he's not really feeling the same way because he's not worried about having enough money for the winter. He is just happy to have a vacation. Maybe if he's that way, scholars, I want to dig into my brain and actually teach you a word. I'm going to go right here where it says Mr. Popper. I don't have enough room, but I'm going to chunk it down. I am going to say that I'm going to say just in a few words, he is carefree. And I'm going to say not worrying. And I'm going to put vacation. Even though I want to write all of that there, scholars, it is okay if I chunk it down. If you have the complete answer, say it now. Go. Yes. All right, we're going to pause right there. We're going to keep reading. Let's keep reading. See what happens next. Oh no, answered Mr. Popper. You wouldn't think it was dull if you had gone with me to see the movies of the Drake expedition at the Baijiu last year. Well, I didn't. I don't think any of us will have any money for movies now, answered Mrs. Popper, a little sharply. She was not at all a disagreeable woman, but she sometimes got rather cross when she was worried about money. Ooh, think to your brain, what does cross mean? Just very quickly, what does cross mean? Maybe we can find it in our chart to better understand this story. Oop, I found it right here. It says cross, angry, and annoyed. That's a good observation. Let's keep reading. Let's see. I lost my place. Oh, here we go. If you had gone, my love, went on Mr. Popper, you would have seen how beautiful the Antarctic is, but I think the nicest part is the penguins. No wonder all the men on that expedition had such a good time playing with them. They are the funniest birds in the world. They don't fly like other birds. They walk erect like little men. When they get tired of walking, they just lie down on their stomachs and slide. It would be very nice to have one for a pet. Pets, said Mrs. Popper. First, it's Bill wanting a dog, and then Janny begging for a kitten. Now you and penguins. But I won't have any pets around. They make too much dirt in the house, and I have enough work now, trying to keep this place tidy. To say nothing of what it costs to feed a pet. Anyway, we have the bowl of goldfish. Penguins are very intelligent, continued Mr. Popper. Listen to this, Mama. It says here that when they want to catch some shrimps, they all crowd over the edge of an ice bank. Only they don't jump in because a sea leopard might be waiting to eat the penguins. So they crowd and push until they manage to shove one penguin off to see if it's safe. I mean, if he doesn't get eaten up, the rest of them know it's safe for them all to jump in. Dear me, said Mrs. Popper in a shocked tone. They sound to me like pretty heaven birds. It's a queer thing, said Mr. Popper, that all the polar bears live at the North Pole and all the penguins at the South Pole. I should think the penguins would like the North Pole too, if they only knew how to get there. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Popper yawned and laid down on her mending. Scholars, after the first paragraph, how does Mrs. Popper's dialogue support what we already know about her personality? I know, scholars, when thinking about character trait or character personality, we look at the thoughts, actions, dialogue, and feelings, and that is exactly what I want you to think about. I know that she doesn't want a pet. It would make too hard to keep her house clean, and it would cost a lot of money. This is more evidence that she is tidy and anxious. Let's keep reading. Well, you can go on reading about those heaven birds, but I am going to bed tomorrow, Thursday, September 13th, and I have to go to the first meeting of the Ladies' Aid Missionary Society. September 13th, said Mr. Popper in an excited tone. You don't mean that tonight is Wednesday, September 29th? Why, yes, I suppose it is, but what of it? Mr. Popper put down his book of the Antarctic adventures and moved hastily to the radio. What of it? He repeated, pushing the switch. Why, this is the night that the Drake Antarctic expedition is going to start broadcasting. That's nothing, said Mrs. Popper. Just a lot of men at the bottom of the world saying, hello, Mama. Hello, Papa. Shh, commanded Mr. Popper, laying his ear close to the radio. There was a buzz, and then suddenly from the South Pole a faint voice floated onto the Popper's living room. This is Admiral Drake speaking. Hello, Mama. Hello, Papa. Hello, Mr. Popper. Gracious goodness, exclaimed Mrs. Popper. Did he say Papa or Popper? Hello, Mr. Popper, up there in Stillwater. Thanks for your nice letter about the pictures of our last expedition. Watch for an answer, but not by letter. Mr. Popper, watch for a surprise. Signing off. You wrote to Admiral Drake? Yes, I did, Mr. Popper admitted. I wrote and told him how funny I thought the penguins were. Well, I never, said Mrs. Popper, very much impressed. Mr. Popper picked up his little globe and found the Antarctic. And to think he spoke to me all the way from there, and he even mentioned my name. Mama, do you suppose he means by a surprise? I haven't any idea, answered Mrs. Popper, but I'm going to bed. I don't want to be late for the Ladies' Aid Missionary Society. Scholars, I'm going to leave this and end with this question. Listen carefully. How does Mr. Popper feel about his surprise? What about Mrs. Popper? How does Mrs. Popper feel about it? I'm going to go ahead and have you think about it for a moment. Go ahead and share with somebody if you have somebody next to you, or say it out loud. Go. Tracking me? Yes, Mr. Popper is very excited that he got a shout out on the radio, and he is eager to see what his surprise is. Mrs. Popper is not very interested, and he doesn't really care what his surprise is. Well, I know that maybe this can build up to conflict. And I know that they both have different character motivations here. As we read the next chapters tomorrow, scholars, I want you to think about character motivation and think about if there's any external conflict or any conflict at all. Is there a problem? Think about it. All right, scholars, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.